He's the most authentic bullshitter
Yes,
we could
that's the best
find.
way to put it. He's the most authentic bullshitter. But I think that's more comforting than a person who is inauthentically always trying to say the right
Who's
thing.
inauthentic and still a bullshitter. When you expose people for being unprincipled, when Kamala Harris is up there on stage and saying how busing deeply affected her and who Joe chose to work with offended her and all this stuff, great. And then if you turn around and you take the job and you backtrack on everything, then did you ever really stand for anything? And
Exactly. But no matter what you do, it should be authentic. And it should be the kind of thing that you're willing to bet the farm on, because whether you believe it or not, you are. All of the major agencies are in the trade magazines. When the BLM stuff really started rising a few months ago, they were like, the worst thing you can do right now is say nothing. And I was like, I don't know if that's honestly true. Like
no.
a lot of these brands should just say nothing. Or you could say something, but that doesn't align you with a particular set of ideologies. Like, I don't understand why you didn't see a campaign from a restaurant or like a major pizza chain or something that just says like, listen, these are crazy times, and you should go out there and fight for what you believe in. And when you're done standing up for yourself and what you believe in, we'll be here to feed you.
How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It's been a while.
It has been. It has been. You
Yeah.
seem you seem pretty jovial. I don't know if that's your natural state or recent events of some kind.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but yeah, I mean, it's also it just so happens to be my birthday today,
Oh,
so
happy birthday! I forgot. That's right. You
thanks,
wrote
man.
that to me.
Yeah.
All right. Are you one of the people who is very birthday centric? You
No.
celebrate and no, you don't.
No. You could have just said like, "Hey, are you one of those like 20-year-old girls who thinks it's your birthday week?" No.
Yeah, I don't get it, but I think women in general carry the birthday importance throughout their life in a way that guys, probably
Just
never do.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Like we just don't. We're not that psyched about it. Like, it's just you know what? It's funny too is like, I remember growing up and like watching sitcoms like Home Improvement and stuff, and just being like, oh, I can't connect to any of this. But it was also because I was a kid. And then you get older and you realize like, women get cool things for their birthday, and men get things that they can use to serve women for their birthdays. So, like, my birthday presents are always like, "Hey, I got you all that new stuff for the kitchen, so you can make us dinner all the time." It's like
Right, right.
it's stuff like that. Like, like as men that have property and land and stuff, they're always like, "Yeah, we got you that new lawnmower." It's like, "Oh, cool, my chores for you and the family just got easier." So,
My bar is so low for being even thought of. Like all I want is like M&Ms. Like seriously,
yeah,
like a relationship where the woman occasionally thinks on her own to buy me a little bag of M&Ms. Like that
is
to me is
huge.
everything. It's huge.
Yeah.
Never
Yeah,
happens.
exactly. Exactly. It's like, it's nice. It is nice just to be thought of.
Yeah, and it's funny because one of the things that drew me to you is, I don't remember exactly how I heard of you in the beginning. I think it was, are you even comfortable talking about it? Because I could cut this part out, but
No, no, not yet, by all means.
because
About my
you
cancellation.
the cancellation, right? So I've spoken a lot about cancellations, and we've talked about cancel culture, but you are a living, breathing survivor of cancellation. Just give me a little backstory. What happened? Because you were on Food Network.
Yeah, I was on Food Network, and my contract ran out with them, and our show didn't get picked up. And about 6 months after that, while I was in the process of pitching a bunch of potential news shows to some other networks, I made the mistake of thinking out loud on the internet and sharing an opinion that was not well received. And then, of course, as what happens when people do this, and you've seen this recently with Terry Crews, is if you say something unpopular, then everybody kind of goes back in your archives and tries to link. They try to take old things out of context to link them to their narrative of what you're trying to say now. And so you see this with Terry Crews. It happened to me, so I made a comment on kind of how openly accepted certain types of racism in the country are versus others. And then, of course, everyone went back and found every joke I've ever tweeted regarding race. And then we're like, look, this guy's a white supremacist. And it's like, anybody who knows me, knows my life story, how I grew up, and knows how I even started in comedy would know that that's absurd. But that's not a majority of the people on the internet, right?
No.
And so what you find out is like, everything you've done in your life to build some sort of reputation or human capital can go away in a minute if enough people on the internet just start saying stuff that isn't true. And I think, you know, when we first talked about it, Steve, on your podcast, it was probably over a year
Actually,
ago.
it was your podcast.
Oh, it was on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we first talked about it a while back, it's like it was much more fresh, and there were less instances of this that happened. So I don't think I was the first guy to get canceled, but I was definitely one of the first to have that cancellation moment online. And I'm a guy who kind of fell into a unique situation because, unlike somebody like a Joe Rogan or even a Terry Crews, like, I hadn't established myself in my career enough to financially withstand the consequences of that. And then, you know, in some of the day job stuff that I do, because I've always maintained some kind of day job working in entertainment, I've never gotten to that level where it's like I can walk away from my day job stuff altogether. You know, some of the consequences of this online canceling regarding or related to my television personality bled into even the way it affected my business dealings. So like last year, I had a longtime executive that I work with like reach out and say, hey, I want to create a position at my company for you. I think you got a great skill set. I think you can help take us to the next level. And we spent like 6 months to a year preparing for me to take this job. And on day 2, I was let go because someone that worked for the company that wouldn't even report to me was offended by my cancellation press, and then went to HR and said, yeah, I don't want to work with this person. And without investigation, without any kind of cool down period, without anything like that. And this was completely unprompted.
Just a conversation.
Yeah, it wasn't even like I had even interacted or met this employee. And there wasn't even an opportunity to discuss like, hey, so like, you know, help us understand this. So the thing there was frustrating was the boss that had recruited me and created the position. I've known him for 20 years. He was like one of my regional managers at Hollywood Video when I was a store manager. And he was one of the guys that got me to the multi-unit level, to a district manager, then brought me to 3 other companies after that. So I basically worked with him in almost every company I've ever worked for. So this guy knows me firsthand and knows my reputation, can absolutely attest to the fact that I've always been professional in the workplace. And even when I started doing comedy back in 2007, like none of the content of anything I do or any of that perspective or point of view, because a lot of it is rooted in sarcasm. I mean, I got into doing comedy to say things that I couldn't say at work. And so I definitely wouldn't go back to the office and be like, let me tell you about these bits I'm working on, guys, so I can get us all fired. Like, yeah. I'm clearly smarter than that. And without even consulting him, the HR woman went to the general counsel of the parent company, went over all of the executives in the company I worked for, and they just made the decision without investigating anything. And so when you hear people on the liberal side of the spectrum a lot say like, cancel culture isn't real. It's like, no, it's a very real thing. Like a year ago or 2 years ago, I said something on the internet that people didn't like, and they created a narrative that I was a racist. And an entire year later, a 6-figure-a-year executive position got snatched away because somebody read something that somebody else said that wasn't true. And so there are very real consequences to cancellation. And it's not just for individuals, you know, like myself. It's getting to the point where it's happening for entire brands and entire companies. And it's like, we now live in a world where if you're an advertising or marketing executive in a company, it's like being the head of a studio. It's like if you have one major motion picture flop, your whole team is out.
Well, at least a flop is something that you do in the course of your business. Whereas this other stuff is all peripheral, it's all hearsay, it's all other people's opinions, it's all trolls on the
Yeah.
internet. So there are nobodies who are completely disconnected from you or your profession.
That's very true. A better comparison would be like if Avengers made 400 billion in the box office, but the Rotten Tomato score was 26%, and they just still decided to fire everybody at the studio. That
Or
makes sense.
the guy who directed it cancels the franchise, right? Like if they find
Right.
something on him, it's like, but it actually works the other way around too, because there have been people who have been, let's say, credibly accused, who are big time directors, that it was somehow magically swept under the rug and they continue working because they make the studio so much money.
Well, the Harvey Weinstein thing is a great example. I mean, that guy got to continue to operate for how long with as many high-powered friends and political people in his sphere, and never once was any allegation taken seriously until there were like 50 allegations. And it's kind of the same thing with Bill Cosby. It was like how many years of rumors and stuff existed before anything actually moved and it happened on that. And that's what really sucks about the whole concept of cancel culture, is that it actually could do a lot of good if it was aimed at the right people. And unfortunately, it's aimed at easy targets, and people kind of, go whichever way the wind is blowing, and they like to pile on to whatever the soup du jour is, when in reality there are probably some people out there that are doing really terrible stuff and need to be canceled. And for whatever reason, maybe they're aligned with the right political ideology, or they're on the right team, or they're protected by the right infrastructure. Those aren't the people that get canceled. It's always like a guy, I remember the story of the girl. I can't remember at which company she worked for, but you probably remember this. This was like the first canceling. The girl was on a flight to Africa, and she
Justine,
tweeted a joke.
her name is
Yes.
Justine Sacco, I think.
Yes, that is 100% who I'm talking about. Yeah.
I have
So
a memory
she
for
she
these.
yeah, man. So jumps on a flight, and by the way, like we've all had an idea like this. As we get on a plane, we see something that triggers a joke, and we're like, let me tweet this joke and get on my plane. She had literally tweeted a joke jumping on her flight, and like by the time she landed, her life was over. Like,
Yeah.
and that kind of story is like, Jesus Christ. Like, not only is that terrible, does that set a terrible sort of big brother precedent for everybody where they work, but do you really think you're going to get the best work out of people putting that kind of fear of God into them? That if I even get caught having the wrong idea outside of the workplace, that my career and everything I've worked for, the education I've paid for, that I might still be paying for, is worthless. It's useless. And who knows? I hope she's rebounded. And I think I heard on another podcast that she's actually somewhere else and doing okay. But honestly, man, these things are why the founder of our company, Isaac, wanted to start this agency, Will, and create not just a place where creative can live because these kinds of fears don't exist, but also that people can breathe easily and do great work because they're not showing up going, man, if I pitch the wrong idea in a meeting today, my career is over. And could you imagine how lame a creative environment would be if your job is to create ideas that sell brands, and you have to go into work every day and be afraid that, like, if I pitch the wrong idea, I'm out.
But you know what? I've been in a lot of corporate boardrooms, and that is the norm. That, fear is the norm, because these are not typically people who wanted to break the rules. These are people who, like the game of corporate. They understand what the boundaries are. They like working their way up the corporate ladder. They know that, what the politics are and how to navigate them. And just the nature of politics is not risk taking. It's being deft in navigating all these risks, and sometimes saying a bunch of stuff and it means nothing. They're all just empty
Yeah.
corporate phrases. And so,
Yeah, I used to say those are people that talk a lot and say nothing.
oh my God, the nonsense. And even now, some of these jobs, we're engaging with blah blah blah. Like it's all bullshit. Like if you can't explain in English what you do, it's probably not necessary. Whatever
Right.
it is, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like you go back to that Office Space moment, and I think I remember there was a time when I was at Crocs in the mid 2000s
So you were
where
the
I
one
was like,
responsible. Goddamn Crocs.
yeah, no. But I remember when I was there, and we got like this is the problem is when companies are very successful, they love to spend, and it's sort of like it's almost like budgets in filmmaking where they're like, listen, we could do it for 10,000, but if we can spend 25, they'll give us 25. The same thing happens in corporate America where it's like if a department goes like, we need 17 people for this, and if they can convince the people that hold the pocketbook that they need 17, even if they only need 5, then they just build out all these elaborate titles for I remember there was times we were walking through the offices at Crocs as it was expanding, and we were in Niwot, Colorado, and we started with one building and we ended up having 5 buildings. And I remember we would walk into like a cube set, you'd have these offices and then there'd be a four workspace cube set, and there'd be like a 22-year-old like fresh out of school, and you're like, what do you do here? Like, and she's like, oh, I'm vice president of subdivision mergers, and it's just like, what the fuck is this title, man? Like, this isn't a real thing. And so it's like, and literally like they would give like 5 people who do the same job different titles to increase the spend and what they get to have, and it's just like that kind of stuff is what destroys organizations. And that's why companies, like you look at some of these great companies that go down over the years, and it's because they're clogged with groupthink middle managers who nobody's really empowered to make any kind of bold moves inside their organization or to create any work that's memorable or lasting. And the last place that can afford to happen is in the world of marketing and advertising, but it really is right now. And we're hoping that we can kind of be a cure for that and a throwback to the old days of like, we're willing to throw out ideas that, other places might think are too taboo to even consider. And for us, it's just about like, we have to do that to come to the best ideas. And if we're willing to do it and other people aren't, then that's our competitive advantage. And that's what we're going to focus on.
Don't you get the sense though, that now there's sort of triangulation of pressures on companies? So not only is it these online mobs, but you're also seeing, employees buying into this sort of cancel mentality. You also see maybe customers, like real customers, they don't necessarily want to be associated with anyone too edgy. So it's almost like you're being caged in. So even if you are an executive or the CEO of a company that doesn't buy into this nonsense, you're almost forced to abide by it to some extent because you're boxed in by your customers and your employees.
But that just proves, I think you're 100% right about that, but that just proves that how little confidence these companies have in actually knowing why people buy their stuff. Like, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, like, when the protests started happening after the George Floyd killing, I'm not laughing at the situation.
Let's do another take. Let's do another take on this story because
when the public, I'm laughing because I flubbed the name and I said George. When the thing happened with George Floyd and there was all this outrage, and rightfully so, I think everybody that sees that situation, like nobody disagrees that was a horrible situation and a real-time example of like, this is the kind of stuff that perpetuates the narrative of a militant, out-of-line police force, right? But every brand on the planet decided they had to weigh in on this, not just this, but race in America. And it's like, listen, I could be the most passionate person about race in America, but when I go to click to get my Domino's that night, I don't care what they think. I want my pizza and I want it right and I want it on time. And so, one of the things we talk about at Will is like sometimes the right thing to say for your brand is nothing at all. Like sometimes the right thing to do is just to continue to talk to your consumer about what you do and continue to do it well. And one of the companies that I'm a giant critic of in this regard all the time is Chipotle. Chipotle loves to get super socially interactive. They even at one point, I don't know if you remember this, they made like a mini series about their sourcing of their ingredients. And then like 6 months later, they had that huge E. coli outbreak with their produce, which I actually got sick from. I actually got sick from Chipotle and got E. coli infection from eating their stuff. And I'm sitting there going like, you're making web series about sourcing your ingredients and you're failing your customers at sourcing your ingredients. It's like, it's not even putting the cart before the horse. It's like changing the cart into a spaceship and murdering all of the horses.
Well,
Like,
you kind of reminded me. I think it was in the either 80s or 90s, maybe 90s, where Kathy Lee Gifford was doing videos on how to have a great relationship. And then it came out that her husband, Frank Gifford, had been having sex with all kinds of, like, I don't know if they were prostitutes or what, but he was just everywhere.
Those scandals of the 90s.
Yeah, well,
right?
the videos.
This was earlier than that, right?
I don't remember exactly when it was, but I do remember hearing about it on the Howard Stern show, and the hypocrisy. It just, it's very hard to claim the mantle of purity because no one will pass those tests ever.
Yes, and especially over time as the limitations or the boundaries of what we consider puritanical always changing, always moving. I mean, it's interesting that we're getting back into like I remember one of the most iconic memories from my childhood about free speech that has affected everything I do is when Dee Snider from Twisted Sister sat in front of Congress and fought Tipper Gore about censorship in music. And I was like, dude, the fact that this guy who's usually dressed up in hair metal, rock and roll glam is there in a suit, like fighting for this thing. It's pretty important. It's a pretty big deal. And now people that call themselves liberal are demanding the same kinds of restrictions on things because they want to protect their feelings. And it's like, regardless of what you're aiming to protect, like if you are, it's sort of like the whole burning witches mentality. It's like, if you go, well, we're not going to burn these people because we think they're witches, we're going to burn them for these other reasons, the outcome is still the same. You're still destroying something for the wrong reasons, right? And so it's so crazy to see the pendulum swing so far that it's almost gone around and kicked right back from the other side's argument. And so, and you kind of see it goes the other way too, where like the extreme religious right will go so far extreme that they're coming back around to things that liberal people actually want. And so there's got to be some sanity somewhere in the middle. And, it's just wild to me that that those sentiments and those winds are now blowing so hard that like major companies and major corporations are being overtly reactionary to the way these things are moving. And I could only imagine the stress of being somebody who's responsible for brand messaging inside one of those organizations. And your CEO just walks in one day and just goes, abandon what you've been working on for the last 6 weeks. Have you seen Twitter today? And you're just like, ugh, that's my boss. My boss now is Twitter.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think people misunderstand what a corporation is. A corporation is a vessel for profit, no more and no less. And so if you're expecting morality from a fundamentally amoral entity, it's not immoral and it's not moral. It's amoral because its mission is
objective.
money.
It's neutral.
It's neutral. And so, and given the profit motive, it could very easily slip into immoral activity if it doesn't have rails to run on. And it's society's job to create those rails, but it's definitely not the company's. Let's put it this way. If it's up to companies to guide us morally, we are hosed. We are screwed. It is all over. Because if those are going to be our moral champions, we're done as a society. Because you could see what happened with China and the NBA and Nike, right? Because because
it's a
now,
good example.
The profit motive drives the bus. And so now all of a sudden, it's not America's values that are being exported, it's China's will that's being imported.
Yeah. Because of the financial gain. And And part of what we want to do at Will is get away from partisan messaging altogether. Like, it's really about getting people back. Like, be a corporation, make money, make your shareholders happy, create a product that customers love, and we want to help you sell that product. It's that simple. And I think you're right. That is a dangerous game to play when you let the morality of the people who influence your money influence your corporate direction, because then if you end up beholden to the wrong morality, you can end up shooting yourself in the foot. And we haven't really seen that with the NBA yet, but we really can't because of COVID, the way it interrupted the season. And now everything is kind of this hybrid hodgepodge of playoffs and everything else with sports. So we really don't know what the overall financial repercussions are going to be, but it's going to be very interesting to see not just how the upcoming election affects that stuff, but I think the one thing that everyone has to be prepared for economically coming out of this is I think people are going to be much more conscientious about how and where they spend their money for entertainment. And so I think and particularly a lot of people don't realize a lot of the money that sports teams make off of season tickets and stuff are through corporate relationships. Like, most of those season tickets aren't held by Joe Schmo who works a 9 to 5. Most of them are held by Hewlett Packard and Pepsi and everything else. And so when those large companies start going like, yeah, I don't know if this is really the way we should be spending our client money, and those start to pull back, you're really going to feel the brunt of how your behavior is impacted the consumer and what they think of you in regards to that. So to your point about the NBA, if the NBA had to just rely on the public sentiment about their relationship with China to sell tickets, and they come back next year and all of their corporate seats are gone, they would really feel the impact of how that decision has affected them.
Well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, finish your thought, because I want.
Oh, yeah. So I really think companies are going to, particularly coming out of COVID, I think the consequences of some of those political stances that they've taken, right or wrong, will be even more impactful because consumers will have tightened the purse strings. And so they'll be even more discerning about, I don't like what this brand did here. I don't like this campaign that they ran. Like the Nike Colin Kaepernick one is a good example. There are going to be tons of situations like that where take a bold stand, absolutely, but the financial consequences will be felt, I think, 3 to 5-fold what they normally would be coming out of COVID, because everybody is in this kind of conservation mode financially.
Well, I definitely think in the short term they're going to look at those dollars. I do think, though, as time goes on, and if this work from home option or method of working sticks and fewer people are coming into offices, I almost think it could have the contrary effect, where sports leagues and box seats and all that stuff becomes more important because it's one of the few places where people can congregate in sort of a fun setting as opposed to sitting at home on Zoom. So I think I think it's true what you're saying in the short term, but I think in the long term there's going to be a very serious itch for people to get out and congregate in some, meaningful or at least tangible way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the value of live entertainment, and keep in mind, like, I'm still also a stand-up comedian in addition to a biz dev guy at an ad agency. So I hope you're right about that. I do think people will want to get together and socialize and everything else. But I do think it's important that you're the team or the organization or whatever that kind of gets it right, or at least tries to stay objective. Particularly in LA, a good example would be like, how do you decide who to root for, the Chargers or the Rams? Well, if one of them starts talking about a lot of shit online that you're not a fan of, and the other one is pretty neutral, or at least sticks to talking about football, that could decide where you're spending your season ticket money or even your weekend money. And so, I think I think that's kind of the free market angle of how social commentary can affect businesses. It might not determine whether or not you go out to the game, but it might determine which game you go to. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, especially where there's competition between teams. Also, though, if you look at Nike, it's a good example because to them the calculus is kind of simple, right? Because the stuff that they make is going to be worn by younger people, a lot of inner city kids, a lot of people who probably lean left on a lot of social issues. So when they do the math on which side to go with, they may not be losing a lot by alienating people on the right because they can just go full woke and on the balance probably not lose much because there's a few hardcore people go, oh no, I'm only getting Adidas or whatever it is, and
Right, exactly.
but most of the
The
people in the middle.
sneakerheads, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm in the middle, so like I don't care. The Dove lies to me and tells me that I'm beautiful. I know I'm not, but if Dove's on sale, I'm gonna buy the Dove.
Right.
It doesn't matter. And I think same
But
thing.
that goes back to the whole why we buy mentality, which every retail person has probably read that book at some point or another. But let me see this. Yeah, it's Paco Underhill, a book called Why We Buy, and it's a good sort of read. It's mandatory reading for anybody in consumer goods, is just understanding shopping behaviors and things like that. But again, like, if you're making those calculated decisions like a Nike and you're going, this campaign is better for the people that actually buy our stuff in mass, that's the right decision. That's a great decision. What you don't want to do, though, is make a decision like Dick's Sporting Goods did when the whole Parkland thing happened and say, well, we'll sacrifice the 10 to 12% of our business that is guns and ammo to make this political statement because we think we'll see that lift. But then the lift doesn't come because your actual store consumers care about gun issues, and that is a political statement that actually deters them from shopping with you. So, I can't remember what the actual number was, but I'm pretty sure their immediate quarterly earnings after that happened was like, I remember the CFO or CEO on that call being like, yeah, that didn't work out the way we had kind of hoped. We thought we thought we could delete 12% and pick up 20 by being on the right side of history, so to speak. And they didn't stop to think, like, even though this is the national sentiment, is this the sentiment of most of our consumers? And look where most of the Dick stores are. They're not in New York or LA. They're in Pittsburgh. They're in Cleveland. They're in, Denver. And so you got to be conscious about who is our consumer and what message is that going to send to them. And, I'm sure that decision was like a big day for REI because, like, listen, we're not even in the guns and ammo business, but every outdoorsman that's not going to like that is going to come buy from us now.
I wonder what happened when CVS said they weren't going to sell cigarettes because I don't remember seeing the numbers on it. But, cigarettes is the next best thing to coffee, right? Because coffee is this habitual thing you're addicted to and you need to get every day, which is why Starbucks took off like a rocket because, they're basically selling a legal drug. And same thing with cigarettes. So when a company says, no, we're not going to sell this thing that gets people into our store habitually every couple of days, then that could have an impact too. I don't remember. I'd be interested to see the numbers. I don't know. We'll see. I'll look it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of those instances throughout history, and I mean that's one of the famous Mad Men episodes is when they lose Lucky Strike at the agency, and then Don Draper spins it as we had to make this decision morally because smoking is bad for you. And it's just like, as he continues to smoke. So a lot of it is just smoke and mirrors and stuff. I mean, but to me, and what I wrote about on LinkedIn and what I wrote about everywhere when we announced that we were launching last week with Will, is that, I joined this because I'm just tired of marketing that doesn't connect. And, there are a lot of companies I feel like that they avoid really spending any ad or marketing dollars at all because they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they'd rather say nothing. And so they put a lot of their time and energy just into their web development, into building their social following, and a lot of it just goes into influencers, right? So it's like, well, if we get the right influencer wearing our product or eating our sandwich or coming to our restaurant, then that will just drive the sales on its own. But then the problem with that is by not having a brand identity, your brand identity becomes whatever that influencer's identity is. And so that might be limiting as well. And so, I think it's important that, listen, the thing that's exciting to me about businesses and companies is always the story, right? So like, if you're a sandwich shop, what made you want to open a sandwich place, right? And it could be as simple as like, listen, I'm a New York guy, I'm in LA, and there's just not a great place to get sandwiches. That's fine. It doesn't have to be some Oprah-worthy, couch-worthy story. It could just be something as simple as that, but find a way to tell that so that all the other New York guys who feel the same way in LA go, okay, this is my sandwich place. This guy gets me and he gets where I'm coming from.
Well,
There really should be a return to that organic reason for benefit, a reason for business.
Well, story is all that's left because everything else is a commodity. So anything that you buy in a store, anything you could order on Amazon, if you're a small business, you have no business selling it because you can't differentiate. So the only way you can differentiate is by telling a story. It's so funny. I don't have the cup here, but I bought like a coffee cup. I don't even drink coffee. I drink tea. But I use this cup, and since buying it about a week ago, I've gotten, I think, 2 or 3 emails from the company asking me for feedback, reviews, and and they snuck in this whole story about, entrepreneurs and how hard they work, and, how, they're small business, and, what their values are. So, if half the businesses in the country did a fraction of that for a cup, I mean, the amount of business you could generate from just doing that kind of follow-up and telling a story of some kind could be huge.
Tremendous. And it builds brand loyalty, and it just gives you your own identity so that the rage of the day doesn't ever have to become your story or your identity. That's why brand identity is so important. And I think you're going to get back into a place where really good brand people in the space are going to be in high demand, because as brands have kind of blown in the wind with the current events and with political climates and with whatever influencers are doing, they've really lost their own identity. And so, that stuff is going to become even more important. And when you look at the brands that really hit home runs in their channels, they're the ones who have a great identity, right? And so I think at the end of the day, it's like that's like the white whale that every agency wants to do. They want to work on your brand. They don't just want to make campaigns. They don't just want to do things.
The fragile white whale.
Yeah. But I think, I was thinking about, you had me thinking about something specifically, and I was going to, yeah, this is what I was thinking about. One of the things that a lot of restaurants and stuff are challenged with right now, particularly with COVID, is how do we migrate the consumer from delivery through those apps, which take a monster percentage, right? We all have seen that viral post that's the Grubhub receipt from the pizza place in Chicago, and they made like $4,000 in a week or a month or something, and then Grubhub took like 50-60% of that money. And so all of these places need to migrate that consumer away from ordering third party and ordering direct. But sometimes they don't even stop to think like, so why do people order through those third-party things? Okay, it's about convenience and it's about value. And generally the only time I order through one of those apps, if you follow me on Twitter, they are the bane of my existence, right? These are the biggest problem I have with these apps is because if I order from your pizza place and DoorDash delivers it, the minute you hand it off to DoorDash, your brand is in their hands.
Yeah.
And these fucking idiots don't care about your business at all. I've had pizzas shown up on my doorstep from DoorDash where the seal has been broken and a slice has been taken out of the inside. I mean,
Really?
That to me is like, that is the equivalent to a fat man of you coming in and raping and murdering his whole family to take a slice out of my pie. I mean,
I only moonlight as a fat man every year or two, but I gotta tell you,
I literally was ready to. If I had a shotgun, I would have put it in this delivery guy's face when he brought this 9-slice monstrosity to my doorstep, right? And so there's two things as a restaurant that you have to be able to do if you're going to beat those apps and get your consumer to work with you directly. You have to incentivize it the same way. So give me a punch card, give me something that I can, save money if I do it repetitively, keep me coming back, give me the value. But number two, you've got to beat them on service, and you've got to beat them on the delivery has to be faster, it has to be better and friendlier. And if you can do those three things, you've beat them. That's it. And you can keep your margins in your food business that they're completely destroying. And so to me, those things are great customer acquisition vehicles, but if you don't get out of them, especially in this Corona time, you're going to be stuck with a business that isn't profitable, and you're just going to keep showing up and feeding that machine every day. And these giant, tech companies that don't care about service and they just don't care. I've literally had email exchanges with the CEO of DoorDash, and it's gotten delegated to some third level customer service person. I've had the same conversation 5 or 6 times. They are not a service driven industry. They don't care about their service.
It's too high touch. They want everything to be digital, self-service. It's all about you having your destiny in your hands. Speaking of which, that's one of the things I wrote about this in, I think, 2012. I wrote a piece called Surviving Platform Risk. And I remember at the time, all of these different developers were developing on Twitter's platform, and other people were building on other platforms. But they had no plan. And so when Twitter pulled the rug out from under them and said, oh, no more developers, we're only using our platform as a central point of communication. So all those guys were out of business, out of jobs. But it wasn't just them. It's so many of these other people. DoorDash is a perfect example. All of these sort of intermediaries, because it's all middlemen, like all these, so-called innovations are just middlemen products that are trying to insert themselves into a value chain. That's what Uber was. That's what, a lot of these guys are. They're not, delivering the value. ClassPass is another one. They're not building the gyms and taking the capital risk. They're not building they're not hiring the employees. All they want to do is for you to go to their website and choose from a bunch of other people who they don't care if one of them or two of them go out of business, as long as there's enough in the, in their platform to, for you to be satisfied to book something. And so
100%.
All these guys, and so from day one, I agree with your point. It should be use it for acquisition, but immediately start planning your exit. And and I think one of the
if I owned a pizza place, Steve, I would literally put a ad on the box that says that DoorDash delivery you just got probably fucking sucked. Come to us next time and we'll give you a deal.
Well, contractually they can't. Contractually they can't. So
all right, then on the inside of the box.
I think
if you got to spell it in pepperoni.
That's what I was going to say. You spell it in the cheese and the pepperoni. Have a stencil.
Yeah. You could put it in the wax under the pizza. They'll never catch you. And so when the person eats the slices, it's right there. Hey, it's like a ransom note. Don't get abused by them again. Come order through us.
I remember people used to find Jesus in potato chips. You remember, they would see
the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, the Virgin Mary. Yeah. So why not do that in cheese in the pizzas? And you could claim plausible deniability.
Yeah, you just go, listen, man, it's heat activated in the wax. We don't control that. I don't know what that is. That comes from the manufacturer like that.
Yeah, go to Kraft. It's a cheese problem.
But, and I think there are some situations where a company like Chow Now, who is trying to be the service provider for brands to do their own delivery, why are you not slinging mud at these third-party delivery apps? I mean, you should have a campaign that's like, they are destroying your brand. Take it back and let us be your let us provide you all of the same ease of use for your customer, but let you control the experience and the interaction and the delivery so that, some guy isn't eating fries out of your customer's food, which you see these horror videos all the time from people's Ring cameras, guys drinking your friggin' milkshake at your doorstep while they're waiting for you to answer. That's a nightmare.
There is something like that for taxis to basically simulate the same kind of experience that Uber or Lyft provide.
Wasn't that what Taxi Magic was supposed to be?
That's one of them, but there was a whole slew of them, and I think they kind of carved up different localities. So some were big in California, in some cities, others in New York. more difficult when you don't control the full experience, and Uber doesn't fully control that whole experience, but they try to,
Well,
they
the rating system gives them a little bit more oversight into that
It,
situation.
it does. It does. And I think it's very hard to make the kind of money that Uber makes as a service provider because they have to charge sort of a flat fee. And if they charge anything else then they're going to be as parasitic as Uber and Lyft. So, so the drivers wouldn't participate. So yeah, it's tough, man. And there's a lot of these companies that are, to the consumer, realistically providing a better experience. Because I know how many times I've called restaurants to make an order. Just 2 weeks ago, I had people over and I ordered some pizzas. I went to pick it up because they were backed up on deliveries. Talk about bad customer service. And I ordered one square pie, one round pie. They gave me 2 round pies. And at that point, I was like, whatever. You know what? I took it.
If you ever see me being taken out of my apartment in a bathrobe and slippers with handcuffs behind me, I can 100% guarantee you it was a DoorDash or Grubhub or Uber Eats delivery gone south.
You've already. They're going to use this in criminal court.
Yes, this is how they're going to get me at some point. They're going to go, listen, man, like, this is our number. If there's ever like a serial killer moment with delivery drivers, I'm going to be the FBI's #1 suspect. I promise you. If you look at my social media, like I have people that are just like, dude, I don't know why you're still ordering, but it's like some of my favorite places, that's the only way to get it.
What is the upside at this point of social media? Because I'm on it and I'm not sure why. Like I've been doing this show where I just read my tweets because Twitter shadow banned me. So now like no one who doesn't follow me can see my tweets. So I have a show that I've been doing live called Mistweeted by Steve Faktor, where I just read my tweets and talk about them because it's the only way they're going to get seen. So, but that's the visibility part of it. But then when you talk about all the cancellations, you talk about all the, sort of mounting evidence against your murder of your DoorDash driver, you're just building evidence for that.
I am. I'm making their case.
You are.
The inevitable.
Should normal people even ever do it? What's the upside?
That's a good question. And by the way, that is the question that all of these major tech companies like Twitter and Facebook should be really figuring out, because I think the more and more I don't know what your circle is like, but I have a lot of friends that still work in the corporate space. I probably have more friends that work in corporate America than I have friends that work in entertainment. And most of them have just deleted it all. They're off everything. They're off Facebook. They're off Twitter. And not in the way of like, I need this for my mental health, but I'll be back in 2 weeks like you see all the time. Like they're done. And it's because of what you're saying. It's the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Like they'd rather just figure out another way to communicate with their friends that doesn't put them at risk. And so, I think the company that really should be marketing to that right now is Snapchat. Is like saying like, listen, none of your shit is public that you do on our app. There's no feed. There is a feed. I think if you do stories, there's like a public feed, but you could I think you can disable that. And if not, that's something I'd get to work on. But the apps that was what launched Snapchat in the first place, was the idea that at the very least they were texts that went away. And so everybody was like, okay, cool. At least there's not a record of my text, that anybody can just pick up my phone and look at. And of course, I think eventually we found out like, no, they still kind of log everything like every company, because that's how they make money. They need to log that data and use it to sell that data to get advertisement. But I think the more companies, the more tech can kind of privatize your social interactions to where it's just a circle of your friends or it's just a circle of people. Like if Twitter created a groups function, they could probably save themselves. But their whole thing is like, no, it's about making the conversation bigger. And that is a real turnoff for people. So I can tell you, like, I have almost 100,000 followers on Twitter, and people are always like, oh, why do you have such low engagement for your follower count? And it's actually not. It's average. But they're like, oh, it's a lower engagement for your follower count. Do you have all these fake accounts? And it's like, no, I can go back and find real people that were really engaging with me 3 years ago that have abandoned the platform. And there are people I still talk to on Facebook or maybe Instagram, but they have walked away from Twitter for that very reason. They're like, listen, like, I have a friend, she's like, I'm a nanny for a very wealthy, famous family. And if they saw the shit I was liking and posting on Twitter, I would have been fired. And so she was like, I'm just off it. I just got off it entirely. And again, it's like, she's like, listen, I like things that tickle my sense of humor on Twitter. That doesn't have any effect on who I am as a person or how I treat people, but you can't afford to let your employer read into that anymore. And so I think Twitter has a much bigger problem than they realize. And, I don't know the statistics on how their daily active users has swung, because on the flip side, highly politicized people can't get enough of their Twitter. They're in there every day fighting every battle. And these are probably all people that are on disability and they got nothing to do, but to get into the online fights about politics and stuff every day. So it's kind of weird because, like when I started using Twitter, I used it to launch my comedy career. I would make jokes about current events and I would see things that are trending. And I used it almost like I was a late night writer and I was writing jokes for whatever was happening that day. And that's how I end up getting like the first few opportunities in my career as an entertainer was through the stuff I put on Twitter. And then eventually, like, all that stuff, all that content that I used to build my career was used to try to destroy it the exact same way. And so, the tough thing about Twitter is it's very difficult for me to just talk to my customers, right? And so what I'd say, like all the time, I'll post a joke. What was the most recent? Oh, I had one that I thought was really funny, really relevant. I said, Kamala Harris seems like Joe Biden's idea of a black woman. Basically saying that, like, he's like, oh, that's great. She wants to put him in jail too, just like me. And so I'm making a joke. It's satire. Yeah. And it got this tremendous like negative reaction from people that are like, any opposition to Kamala Harris is racism immediately, right? There's no satire allowed. There's nothing else allowed. And so like, I would love to direct that to just my customer on Twitter, not everybody.
There is a new feature, by the way, that Twitter lets you. So I think it allows you to post only to people that you follow, which is kind of weird because shouldn't it be to your followers? But then again, there's no barrier. So I think it's not a good implementation.
Listen, I don't have the answer for how to fix it, but I can tell you, like, if they can answer that $1 million question, they will survive as a company. And if they don't, they won't, because somebody else will innovate in that space. And you look at kind of what Parler is doing right now. And at least with Parler, as clunky as their UX and UI is, and as kind of like as rough as a lot of their stuff is in the early stages, at least they've picked a lane and they have an identity. And so at least the people that are ideologically aligned with what Parler wants to do know that that's a place that's safe for them to go. And the fact that, like, it is the only place for people that have been deplatformed to go, then they're at least getting high engagement from them and their followers. So people like my friend Gavin McInnes, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, these people had major followings, and whether you like them or not, or you agree with them or not, there's money to be made by giving these guys a platform when people want to listen to them. They want to hear what they have to say. And so again, like going back to the ethos or the pathos of our agency, it's like we want to make sure that all the voices that have an opportunity to be successful and make money are heard, whether it's a brand, an individual, whatever. We care about opportunity and we care about money. We don't care what somebody's political philosophies are. We don't care which way they lean. And I will say this, but if there's opportunities for us to go after brands that lean conservative because other major agencies don't want to work with them for fear of their own brand, because they're putting their own brand over their clients, we will 100% be the agency for those companies.
But aren't those agencies sort of shielded because they don't put their names on the ads, so they just assume that the company takes the brunt of the criticism?
Yes and no, because a big emerging space for agencies is thought leadership. And so then now CEOs are kind of these major agencies and CMOs and stuff. They're holding themselves out as thought leaders themselves. And so then, which is in a way kind of a conflict in some regard. It's IP as well, so there's a lot of capital to it, and it's quite frankly how a lot of brands stand out. It's a big part of how we're going to stand out is with some of the thought leadership stuff that we publish and some of the things that we'll comment on in our thought leadership pieces. But the problem with some thought leadership is like when you start to drink your own Kool-Aid and think that the prominence and importance of your brand and your image supersedes that of the people hiring you to sell theirs. And that's where it gets a little dangerous. It's kind of like, it's one thing to be a really charismatic speaker and somebody that people are willing to follow. It's another to start a cult. Right. And so there's a fine line there between like a good level of respect and engagement and conversation. And then there's one where you're no longer serving the right master, so to speak. Like if you're serving your own company at the detriment of your clients, you can't make money by talking about yourself. You're going to pay yourself to market yourself. That's not a viable business model. So, you know, if you get to a point where some of these agency executives, and you'll see this is going to come, where they're going to start publishing pieces on how the work they make makes them sort of superior in the sense of like self-importance. It's kind of how you see in Hollywood a lot of executives patting themselves on the back for our casting is the most diverse and inclusive. And it becomes a snake eating itself, because then what they'll do is they'll paint themselves into a corner and they'll set a standard that they absolutely can't deliver and live up to themselves. And then they'll fall victim to the circumstances they created. It's like that scene in The Matrix where she goes, don't worry about the vase. And he goes, what? And then he knocks it over. And she goes, now you'll wonder if it would have happened had I not said anything, right? That is what the ad world is kind of doing to itself right now. It is creating an environment where it inevitably will knock the vase over regardless of what they think they're doing.
Well, you could make the argument that Biden's decision to choose a woman, or to announce he's choosing a woman, and then later on a woman of color, could be exactly that. Because, you know, some would make the argument that he would have been better off choosing Andrew Yang, who had a passionate following, or choosing maybe, I'm trying to think who, I mean, you know, Bernie.
Well, even like an Amy Klobuchar, who actually has a pretty good, who I think fit his campaign maybe better than Kamala Harris, and didn't assassinate him on stage in the debates. Like the fact that she's like brushing that off, like, well, that's just a debate. We say all kinds of shit we don't. It's like when somebody says, oh, I didn't mean that, I was drunk. It's like, well, being drunk doesn't make you manufacture things that you've never thought. It actually probably is a manifestation of what you really think and what is the truth.
Well, and the other person, you know, he could have gotten, if he didn't make the pronouncement, he could have gotten Andrew Cuomo, who jumped in terms of regard within the party because of, you know, he didn't do a great job because I lived in New York at the time, but the perception was that he did because of his news conferences, and he did, you know, a bunch of straight talk that others maybe weren't doing. And that's another guy.
It was like Giuliani during 9/11. It was like, you know, everybody, when he was handling that crisis, everyone was like, that's our next president. And he didn't even get involved in a presidential candidate until what's like 20 years later.
Yeah. And it was too late by then. He was already crazy.
He lost all of the good mojo that he got from 9/11. So I agree with you that Cuomo, or as Tim Dillon calls him, meatball. Affectionately, you know, if they don't bring him into the space, they'll lose all that good capital too. And honestly, that probably from a political strategy perspective would have been the best decision, because then you're literally taking the guy who's on the front lines of the COVID thing. And if that's going to be an angle that you use to try to take down Trump, you would have had a fighting chance. But now it's like you picked two candidates, one that you declared was based on identity politics before you named the candidate, so there's no debating that. And then number two, you picked two centrist people that your only hope is to appeal to the law and order voter for Trump, and then but your policy completely alienates you from that voter entirely. So it's like, it is the most head scratching strategy I've ever seen. And listen, it might be 4D chess and I don't understand it, but I really, my gut tells me that this is going to be one of the most horrifically one-sided elections in American history, and it's not going to go the way that the media thinks it's going to go,
Well,
or that the polls are saying.
the reason I brought it up was less about the political angle, but to reinforce the point that you were making, which is when you make decisions based on your own so-called thought leadership and you start smoking your own dope and you start to believe, right? I mean, think about it. You're like, hey, what matters more is your immutable characteristics rather than your qualifications or your, whatever else that makes you likelier to be the best candidate. That's what they effectively did. That's not to say she's a bad candidate. I don't know. Maybe it all works out and I'm wrong, you're wrong. But the point I'm making is when you do that, you are now, you've created a new set of rules. And, on some level, I admire the Democrats for eating their own cooking, right? Because they're like, okay, immutable characteristics is the most important thing. It doesn't matter how many people they've locked up, what they've done in the past, who they've insulted.
It doesn't matter that they're probably the most Republican Democrats in the recent history of Democrats. Like, it's so funny. I talk about this. Like, if you looked at like Clinton's campaigns and Bill Clinton, if you looked at his campaigns and his rhetoric and everything, you'd think he was running as a conservative today. Yeah. Like, and a lot of the legislation that Biden authored and stuff and really had a major impact on in that time frame was under that administration, and with that kind of rhetoric and, from the whole super predator crime bill, basically. And, it's like, and that's the thing that's kind of interesting is, on one hand, people look back at the Central Park 5 letter that Donald Trump posted and like, look, this is proof that he's a racist. And they ignore the fact that, like, that was the primary political narrative at the time, was this sort of law and order, our country's getting out of control and we need to get it back under control. That was campaign strategy from the most liberal people at the time in the country. And so it's interesting because we're kind of entering that space again as well. And I ultimately think that the debate is going to be who can get the country back under control. Yeah. And the part of the one thing that kind of leans right and that favors Trump in that regard is almost all those cities are Democrat run. So like, that's going to be a very hard, it's like, we're going to fix it. He's like, you Democrats have been running those cities for 50 years. You've already proven you can't fix it. What's the next issue? So, I think, again, I kind of see what they might be trying to do, but man, it's going to be an uphill battle. And, you brought up a really good point, is like, I think brands are potentially a danger of doing the same thing. Is you really don't want to lock yourself into an ideology that can evolve, right? Like, you don't want to paint yourself into a corner. And so I think it's good to be joining the conversation, but you got to join the right ones, and you have to make sure that the stance you take in trying to latch on to whatever's happening real time and have some marketing interaction with it, you got to make sure that it doesn't end up painting you into a corner that alienates consumers or doesn't allow your brand to evolve. And, politicians are probably the perfect example of sort of like snaking out of that. Like, nah, I know I said he's a racist, but now I'm his VP. And, we were just debating. But yeah, it's like, and especially with the travel of information, that tap dance is going to get harder and harder for people to swallow. And one of the things that I think is like really exciting about things like social media and the way people can communicate with each other is the amount of like discernibility that the general public just has for the official narrative now. Like, they've literally caught so many real-time lies that it's almost exciting, the crazy conspiracies that Americans are believing now, because it just goes to show you that they are that untrusting of what they're being told. And so if people are so untrusting of official narratives that they will believe that the world is flat, then the brands, the politicians, the companies, whatever, that can quickly reestablish trust with the American people and their consumer, those are the people that are going to win. And I think that is Trump's biggest advantage is that as awful as he can be and as terrible as his decisions can be and as rough of a president, all the negative things you could say about Trump, he doesn't ever try to tell you that it's not him. He doesn't ever be like, I'm a nice guy. Like he doesn't, I mean, he might say that, but
I think he does. I think, look,
yeah, but you know, the fact that he sort of leans into his identity and doesn't waver as much and doesn't flip flop as much, like he doesn't ever come out and like immediately condemn something that he said the day before.
Yeah, well, he's the most authentic bullshitter.
Yes,
we
that's
could
the
find.
best way to put it. He's the most authentic bullshitter. But I think that's more comforting than a person who is inauthentically always trying to say the right
Who's
thing.
inauthentic and still a bullshitter, right? So
Yes,
you'll take
they're
the
bullshitting
right,
too.
right. So, and that's true, and that's, I think, the difference, because when you expose people for being unprincipled, when Kamala Harris is up there on stage and saying how busing deeply affected her and how it was a violation of her trust, and how, and who Joe chose to work with offended her and all this stuff. Great. And then if you turn around and you take the job and you backtrack on everything, then did you ever really stand for anything? And
Exactly. Exactly.
People can decide for
100%
themselves.
what it is. That's 100% what it is. And so, going back to the brand piece of it, I think it's sometimes better to say nothing than to stand for the wrong thing. But no matter what you do, it should be authentic, and it should be the kind of thing that you're willing to bet the farm on, because whether you believe it or not, you are. And I think a lot of times that's kind of where people get into trouble, is they go, well, we have to. Like, I remember the rhetoric coming out of like all of the major agencies or in the trade magazines when the BLM stuff really started rising a few months ago. They were like, the worst thing you can do right now is say nothing. And I was like, I don't know if that's honestly true. Like,
No.
a lot of these brands should just say nothing. Or you could say something, but that doesn't align you with a particular set of ideologies. Like, I don't understand why you didn't see a campaign from a restaurant or like a major pizza chain or something that just says, like, listen, these are crazy times, and you should go out there and fight for what you believe in. And when you're done standing up for yourself and what you believe in, we'll be here to feed you.
Right.
Like
right.
that is a simple message, and it could have been like a fist with a piece of pizza in it. But
by the way, I mean? There was a fist. Did you see the KFC ad where I think it was from Australia or something, or New Zealand, where they had a piece or a drumstick standing up in a shadowy type of environment, and the shadow of the drumstick was a Black Panther fist? Yeah.
I mean,
it was so bad. It was so bad.
Well, it's also maybe not the food brand that should do that.
Right,
one.
right. KFC has its own issues.
You kind of maybe don't do it with the chicken drumstick,
Right.
and again, me as a comedian, I'm going to think worst case scenario with how that's going to be interpreted. Maybe don't have the chicken project a Black Power symbol. That's a little contradictory, but I mean, but my point is that it's like you can say something without picking a side that says, like, our role is not to tell you what to fight for, what to believe, what to think. Our role is to feed you at the end of the day when you've exhausted yourself, standing up for the things that make this country great. Yeah. And those are the kind of unifying messages that great advertising used to have, like the Hands Across America Coke ad that everybody remembers of, buy the world of Coke. Those kind of things were the legendary ads that were unifying messages, and that brands kind of were able to say, like, here's how we contribute to the conversation in a very real way, versus having this overblown sense of self-importance where they think they're contributing in a way that they do not, or they try to contribute in a way that they do not. And that is dangerous territory. Well, be the place that feeds people when they fight for what they believe in. If you have that message, no one can be mad at you. And that's a very simple message.
Well, this is not that uncommon, especially with corporate social responsibility and corporate giving. if you look at the percentage of money that's given, in terms of percentage of revenue or even percentage of profit to all these causes, it's very small. But the desire to wrap yourself in the glory of helping is huge. And so a tiny little dollop of money, a couple of million, which is pocket change for a giant corporation, to one of these charities gives them all of this sort of, this aura of helping, which empirically it doesn't. It might on the margins, help a few people, but at the end of the day, that's not how help is going to happen. It's not going to be through, the largesse of corporations deciding to give them, a little dollop of help.
Yeah, and one of our partners, Brad, who's our head of accounts, he comes from the world of CSR, of corporate social responsibility. He worked for the Skid Row Housing Trust here in LA. He's been in that space for a long time. And so it's very good for us to have somebody in the company that is familiar with that space. But he's also a guy that is so bleeding hard and dedicated. Is like, the thing I love about Brad is that he doesn't want any bullshit interaction with it from a CSR perspective. Like his philosophy is like, I only want to work with you if you really want to do the work and you really want to make an impact and make a change, because there are so many companies out there that are like, ooh, this might be a way to hold ourselves out. And they really don't care about following through on the commitment. And so again, it's about joining the right conversations. We're all about the right CSRs for the right brands and the right charities and the right groups, but it's got to be a real organic connection. Again, we go back to this word of authenticity. I think we live in a time where consumers, viewers, everybody, they can smell bullshit better than any group of people throughout the history of society. So if your brand gets into one of these arrangements with a charity or a group or an organization for the wrong reasons or self-serving reasons, the public's going to know it, they're going to smell it, and it's going to torpedo whatever you're trying to do.
And how are you going to balance your tendency as a comedian to make fun of these things with the things that you're actively working on seriously?
Yes, so that's a great question, and I think that's part of what makes our team so cool is that we have all these different backgrounds. Like when people cancel you or they talk about you publicly or there's this rhetoric out there, it's not really based in truth. I was very proud of the fact that in all the places I worked, my teams were always incredibly diverse, not just racially, but culturally. And I'm preparing a thought leadership piece that's going to go out. But the problem with ticking a box of racial diversity and lacking cultural diversity is that you're actually not getting different voices in the room.
Right.
You might have all of this racial diversity, but if everyone went to Ivy League schools, you have no cultural diversity. And so there were times I remember as like a DM or a regional manager, I would go out and I would recruit a guy that had no background in retail specifically or in our space specifically, because I wanted that cultural and occupational diversity where this person's going to attack our business with a fresh perspective from different angles, and they're going to bring best practices from another industry that we don't even think about or know about. And that kind of diversity has to exist in your company for you to have the best ideas. That's the thing that's like the big facade about Hollywood is they go, we're starting to diversify our writers' rooms and our production companies and everything else, but they're pulling people of color from the same places they were pulling the white people that were running those shows and running those writers' rooms and acting in those places. They're all culturally from the same upper echelon of elitism. They're wealthy people. They're the sons and daughters of generations of politicians and oligarchs. And there aren't a lot of like Gina Rodriguez's who are, Latino from LA, came up blue collar. There aren't a lot of people like that are actually breaking into the entertainment industry. And that's why they're not seeing the movement that they want, is because it is a facetious diversity, and it's not real diversity. It's just like you're literally just checking the diversity box because you're like, technically we got a black kid, but he's a black kid from Stanford like all your other analysts, and he had the same experience growing up, and so you're going to get the same work from him that you're getting from your all white workforce. So companies have to stop being lazy with diversity, that is not, I don't think that's really what the people want either. I think people want an actual culturally diverse workplace, which means different people, different backgrounds, different experiences, because all that collectively makes the unit stronger.
I wonder if who is actively thinking about these things in a corporation, because I think a lot of people just want to go home at a reasonable time. Like I think there is a segment of people who's really focused on these things, and I think the vast majority, they're not looking to climb the ladder. I did a piece years ago called "The 9 Corporate Personality Types and How to Inspire Them to Innovate." And and the biggest percentage of workers are toilers. People who essentially just they know they're going to get their satisfaction in life outside of work. It's not going to be the job that delivers it. And so I think there's a lot of high-mindedness that's being projected onto amoral entities.
Well, I think you're right. But I will tell you, so I have a friend, and my founder Isaac, when he listens to this, is going to laugh, because we met because we have a shared friend, a guy named Charles Disney, who is a comic friend of mine, and I've done his podcast several times. He's done my podcast several times. Charles is the guy you're talking about. He doesn't intend to derive any sense of joy from his job whatsoever. He detests corporate speak. He detests everything about that. He has, similarly to like what you outlined about 9 different types of corporate personalities, he's got these types of guys that he works for. They're always kind of the same guys or gals, and it's very one-dimensional, and he just detests it, right? And he's the guy you're talking about, the guy who does not intend to derive any sort of joy from his workplace experience. It is a necessary evil for survival, and he endures it for the 8 hours a day that he has to, and then literally leaves all of that work in the office when he goes home. He doesn't even think about his job at home. It doesn't matter to him. Like he's that compartmentalized, and there are people like that. But I also know that it's because Charles has never worked at a place that encourages him to be anything but that. And so while it's chicken and egg, right? Like, how do people get like that? I would argue because they've never worked for people like me. And, and people like me need to always continue to try to win over guys like a Charles, because that's the only way they're ever going to feel fulfilled at their job. And you shouldn't, it pains me to think that people go to a job like that. It's like, I would never go to a job where what I think about what we're doing or my ideas are just ignored. Like I would have thrown myself off a building in my 20s if that was my experience. And I was lucky to have great mentors and great leaders. And my girlfriend deals with this kind of stuff too. It's like, she's like, I have never had somebody take me under their wing like your bosses and your leaders and your mentors. And so I've never gotten the feeling of belonging and being part of something from my jobs that you have. And I feel like your responsibility, if you're somebody who is lucky enough to have had that in your life, then your responsibility is to pay that forward and to try to make other people feel that way about working with you. And that is just my penance to pay for having people who had no reason to put me under their wing or to teach me things or to help me in my career other than they felt like it was the right thing to do and they wanted to help me. And so if I just took that and never did anything with it, that would be the biggest slap in the face to those two guys that were my primary mentors, that I could possibly do. You know what I mean?
Well, I think there's a wiring thing too. So, when people leave school, some are, A students, some are B, C, D, and so on. Majority somewhere in that C range. So there is, and they have to work, right? They have to contribute somehow and, bring home enough money to survive. And some do make it into corporate settings. And a corporate doesn't only have A players or B players. They're going to have a lot of C players too. And now the question is, what level of motivation can the job provide? And then If it can't provide it, do you cast away the C players? No, you need them too. But the question is, can you lift them into the level of motivation, or can you give them maybe a sense of meaning, which is not different than a sense of purpose, right? Purpose has like this greater goal that you're chasing, which they may not be, but at least meaning in the tasks that they do and the work that they do, that they understand the importance of it and the contribution to the organization or the people they work with. So then at least they have a stake in the quality of the work. And so I think there's probably different degrees to which you could ramp up someone's motivation.
Well, I've always said I agree with you for sure. And I've always said, and maybe part of the reason why I didn't come out with that sort of sensibility is because I didn't go to college. And so I didn't have the will to contribute sucked out of me. And that was also why I was a C student, because I learned very early in my high school years that the way to get A's was to agree with your teacher, and to think for yourself was the way to immediately be beelined into a C student. So I was like, why the fuck would I work, so hard to make my points when it's really not about that. It's about just agreeing with whatever your teacher thinks, particularly in the areas of like literature. I'm talking about sort of more the artistic sides of school, like your English and your theater and your social studies, stuff like that, versus mathematics, which is like there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And even then it was a little challenging because I was like a computer programming kid. So like we would be in a calculus class and I go, why do I need to learn this? I can write a computer formula that's going to calculate this for me way faster. And they go, well, you can't do that. And I go, well, yeah, I can. I'll show you. And they go, no, you have to do it the way I show you. And then you go, well, what difference does it make if I come up with the same right answer? It's just I'm using the way my brain works best to come up with the result. And this is an outdated method. And so people were more tied up in methodologies and things like that, and not really focused on like, are people actually able to compute what they have to compute with the knowledge that we're giving them, right? So I didn't come out of school with that sense of being beaten down, because I never went to college. I jumped right into the corporate world, and by the time I was 20, I was managing other people. The key to all good sales and good management is you have to talk in terms of what's important to the person that you're talking to. And there's a great book that outlines this. It's called The 7 Powers of Questions by Dorothy Leeds. And the book changed my management philosophy in understanding that asking the right questions will always be infinitely more important than having all the answers. And so one of the ways as a 21-year-old district manager that I was able to get the 45-year-old C player who clocks in, doesn't care about being part of a team, just wants to make her money and go home, was by acknowledging that and listening to her and saying, listen, if this isn't a career for you, then what are the things in your life that are important, and how does work affect those things, and how can we make work affect those things less? Okay. And I can tell you, by doing that Mr. Miyagi shit with her, the respect level was tremendous, and it actually made her more engaged at work, because I said, listen, if your job is just your job, I understand that and I respect that. And as long as you do it, you are welcome here. Your performance is good. Your results are good. That's fine. But how is your work affecting the things you do care about? Your family life, your home life. Are you not spending enough time at home? Do you feel like, and how can I help you minimize the impact that your job is having on the things you do care about? And that was all it took. And I wasn't full of shit. It wasn't a tactic. I genuinely believe that the best way to get the best out of your people is to genuinely care about the things that they care about. And just by doing that and really doing it and taking an interest in it, you will turn that C player into at least a B player, because they're more engaged because you are giving them things that matter to them. And so I think sometimes companies take the day off, so to speak, in the responsibility they have in enriching the lives of the people that work for them. But sometimes it is as simple as saying, what are tools I can give you to make sure you get out of here at 5 o'clock every day so you don't miss your kids' baseball games? Because that is the most important thing to you. And if that is also the most important thing to me and how we interact, you will do the best work for me that you can do. And companies, like the bigger companies get, the less they do it and the less people are engaged. And so I go back to my friend Charles and I go, if he ever had a boss like me at some point in his career, he wouldn't be a C player. He'd be a B player. And then, by the way, he might be an A player in terms of productivity, but in terms of buy-in, it's not there because nobody has ever genuinely showed him that they give a shit. And you can't fake that. You cannot fake that. And
Yeah.
so I've tried to create that at every company I've ever gone to after I kind of learned that. And I realized, oh, wow, that's why I really give my best to my bosses, is because they've taken that interest. They know those things about me and they care about them.
Well, just like the good management techniques, as you've described, get passed down or spread within organizations, bad ones do too. So if you
Sure.
have a lot of people who don't know how to manage people or be authentic with them and really try to understand what their motivations are and then guide them to that, mutually better place, you're going to have a lot of bad people hired, a lot of bad performance multiplied across divisions.
Yeah. Well, in that process, really, that marriage has to start in the interview process. Like, why do you want to work here? What do you want from your job? Tell me about the worst boss you've ever had. Tell me about the best boss you've ever had. I mean, and so a big part of me establishing the right cultural fit for the people who come to work for us is about understanding those things and saying, like, listen, we care less about which way you lean. We care more about who you are, what's important to you, and can we deliver for you in the way that we expect you to deliver for us? And I don't think a lot of companies take that responsibility on with the people that they hire. And that's where that relationship becomes more transactional and less valuable to both sides.
To what extent do you think people's political identities will subside and they start to develop real identities again, as opposed to being completely defined by their political views and who they vote for and what causes they stand up for or don't stand up for? So, because I feel like that probably in the Trump era has dominated. And the question is, does
Yeah.
it go back?
Well, it's going to take leaders to do that. It's going to take leaders to do it. And it's going to take, like, people like an Elon Musk, who's a public CEO of a company that a lot of people talk about and are enamored with. It's not going to be until somebody like that starts talking about these kinds of things and starts behaving this way that we'll get back to that. Because most of the prominent figures in business and leadership are very outward about which way they lean. And so people feel like conformity is the best way to adhere. And so it's going to take some kind of leadership. And I know people say, like, well, that should be the role of the president, or that should be the role of your CEO at your job. But it's like, yeah, I mean, not just those people. It doesn't have to be those people, but it is going to take somebody stepping out of some prominence and leading the charge on on setting the tone. Setting that tone is that who you are and what you do is way more important than your political beliefs. I mean, I say this on my podcast all the time. It's like, remember back when who the president was like 1/4 of 1% of where we spent our brain power? Like, we just used to not think about it. Like, Obama was the president, but the entire time he was the president, we just didn't think about it. It didn't matter to us. We had lives, we had goals, we had families, we had things that were way more important. And the fact that this has become some people's most important shit is a testament to how we've gotten away from people establishing their own identity and their own values and living according to those things and not what they think they have to conform or adhere to. I mean, politics is filling a blank space on the chalkboard that we should be filling out for ourselves. And that's the only way that we can get out of that is to start filling in our own chalkboard. And somebody's going to have to remind everybody to do that.
Well, what concerns me is the rhetoric that's circulating now is one that puts the onus of doing that onto others, onto government, onto the world. It's not you taking it upon yourself to define yourself and what you want to do. And this, I think, is a very paralyzing way to go.
Yeah, people are submitting and going, no, I want somebody else to fill in my chalkboard. And that's why I say it's going to take leadership. It's going to take somebody that goes, no, we don't do that. Like, and that whether that's, government saying like, we're not going to fill your chalkboard in for you. That's what this country was built on, is the idea that you're going to fill out your own chalkboard, and we're all going to do that. And we're going to try to do it collectively as best as we can. And that's really like, if you really want to drum up the ideological differences between left and right, you have one side that wants their chalkboard filled into them, and you have another side that just wants to fill out their own. And that's really what it boils down to. And again, it's going to take leadership to convince those people that, getting your chalkboard filled out for you is not in your best interest. Is going to take real convincing leadership and a real convincing message. And, that is where I definitely believe that Trump falls short, is that I don't think he's wrong in saying this is a country where you got to fill out your own chalkboard. I think he's fucking terrible at communicating that in a way that people go, you know what, he's right. Because the right kind of leader and the right kind of inspirational person can light that fire under that person's ass and go, yeah, you know what, you're right. I got to stop sitting around and waiting for things to happen for me. I got to make them happen for myself. And, Tony Robbins is a guy who comes to mind right away, who is a huge thought leader in that space of like, take control of your own destiny. People talk about all the time, manifesting this is what is hilarious to me, by the way, Steve, is that in LA, people talk about the power of manifestation all day long, about manifesting what they want for themselves in their lives, and then bitch that the government doesn't provide it for them. It's the most conflicting ideology I've ever seen, where it's like, how do you have a vision board and then also expect the government to give you free healthcare? They are completely conflicting philosophies, and you don't see the contradiction in it. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to take real leadership. And when I say leadership, I don't mean somebody in a leadership position, but it's going to take it could be a comedian that puts this in a way that is impactful. And there are comedians out there that are impactful enough to do it. A guy like Dave Chappelle, somebody like Ricky Gervais, Bill Burr. These are the kind of
What
comics.
about guys with missing slices of pizza? Could it be one of those?
Yeah, well, who knows? And maybe, and listen, I've only ever done comedy because I want to be that guy. And I've only tried to write things that are both silly but also accomplish that goal. But that is what drives me in my life all in every channel that I'm in, whether it's comedy, whether it's business. It's about encouraging people to fill out their own chalkboard and to color in their own, it's trying to get people to think for themselves and to really be able to get value and kind of like fill up their cup with the things they can control and the things that make them most happy. And a lot of that is just getting away from waiting for other people to fill those voids for you.
Yeah, it's an empowering message for those out there who are gonna, picket or maybe break some glass on cars, and now they're gonna go, wait a minute, I'm gonna get a vision board.
No. Please don't let that be the takeaway. It's just make a vision board. But yeah, that is because a lot of people do that. They don't understand what it's supposed to do. But set some goals. Set some goals for yourself. Find a way to accomplish them. And I'm telling you, man, everything I've ever set for myself and accomplished, I feel way better doing than something that someone just told me I had to do or else. And people are genuinely. You have to make the choice in your life to be consequence driven or incentive driven. And I think you are going to be much happier and more productive if you create your own incentives and you go like, these are the things that I'm going to incentivize myself with to do the things I want to do for myself, versus just being a consequence driven person and going, well, I guess I'll work so I don't go homeless, or I guess I'll do this because I have to, or I'll do this because I don't have another choice. I mean, that existence is never going to be as fun as the other one.
Well, just before we go, just so people know that you speak from personal experience here, I think it was right after the job fell through where they hired you and then they let you go because of what we discussed earlier. You were in a tough bind. You were actually considering leaving LA. Can you just tell me the little story, the tidbit there of what happened, that window of time?
Yeah, well, we felt I juggled a lot financially to take that job and to, so like what people don't understand is when you're a comedian, things kind of work in cycles. And so like if you're preparing to take a more traditional 9 to 5 or corporate job, you kind of got to take yourself out of the loop for potential work as a comedian or even a TV host or anything like that, so that your calendar is opened up. So you kind of got to go like 2 or 3 months without doing a lot, and you got to have money tucked away so that you can jump in that cycle and not have stuff booked out. And so I basically like closed my calendar, and I was like Uber driving to make ends meet, but shuffling some bills around, kind of depending on that paycheck coming in when I knew it was going to come in. And so when that happened 2 days into the job, it was pretty financially devastating. So much to the point that we had to like create a GoFundMe to just like cover our bases and cover our bills and be able to stay in Los Angeles and keep paying our high rent and, surviving. And if I didn't have a great network of friends and supporters and people that believed in me, we would not have made it. And so it wasn't because, the company did the right thing or, we were well prepared. It was quite the opposite. It was literally just because of the kindness of strangers and the kindness of the community of people that we've, built in our lives, that we were able to kind of get through that period. And so it's also a big part of why I feel like you kind of got to give something of yourself in whatever your work is, because so you never know when you're going to be in that situation. And listen, I'm the first guy to like, as a comedian, shit on GoFundMe's and like I have a whole bit in my act about like, if you want to Shark Tank staying alive, then I'm going to need to see some shit. Like I want to see like, what are you going to do with it? It's kind of like that scene in Saving Private Ryan at the end where he's like, you have to earn this. Like all these guys died to get you back to your family. You better earn this. Like I have a bit that's basically like, if you want us to do a Kickstarter to keep you from dying of cancer, then how you going to earn it, right? And then I found myself in the exact same situation of like, man, I got to reach out to people, and I can tell you it's incredibly humbling. It sucks. Nobody ever wants to do that, but it is also lit a fire under me to not only fight my own battles in that space, but I'm working on a book to help other people understand, like, these are your legal options to protect yourself. And it's only until we financially damage companies enough for making these kinds of decisions, firing people for tweeting things that are related to their political ideas or beliefs or their moral beliefs or ideas, that we can get companies out of your fucking business. Do you know what our social media policy is at Will? We don't care what your social media is at Will. We don't tweet whatever you want, talk about whatever you want, do whatever you want. The only thing we care about is if you share insider secrets or you share our IP, then we might have a problem with it. But I don't give a shit if you are part of the humans that identify as dolphins hate group. I don't care. That is your private life. You're allowed to do that. For us to care about that would be for us to care about which team your son plays for in softball. It's not our fucking business, and it shouldn't be any company's business. And I think the more people that fight back against that big brother control of your job now reaching into your life and saying, we're going to determine what you're allowed to participate in, that is something that has to be, vehemently fought in the corporate space. And, anything I can do to help talk about that fight and to help people fight that fight, that's a cause that's very important to me, because that's part of answering your question earlier of how do we get back to normal. That's part of it. We have to get companies out of your fucking business when you're not at work.
Well, the part that you should also include is thinking about all of the opportunities you don't get, because when you get fired for a tweet or something. What you don't know is how all of your social media is affecting your ability to ever get the job in the first place. So that's the unknown here, because
and it's not entirely unknown, because like when it was happening, I was getting messages from verified celebrities on Twitter, friends of comedians on Twitter that were like, hey man, privately, I 100% agree with what you say, but it would be career suicide for me to support you publicly. So I just can't. And it's like, that sucks, dude. To get like a message from a guy who is worth $150 million and is a very successful A-list actor in Hollywood saying you're dead on and I agree with you, but also good luck and you're on your own, that sucks. That is the worst feeling to feel in the world, to say that, like, boy, wouldn't that be nice to just stay in your mansion with all your fucking money and agree with other people fighting for the things that you claim to believe in, but you don't take any of the risk and you don't help the people that do take the risk. I will never be one of those guys. I'm telling you, if the shoe was on the other foot and I was the guy with 150 million and somebody went out and fought for something I believed in and suffered the consequences, I would be on their doorstep with $1 million check the next day and go, fucking do not let this ruin your life. Keep fighting for what you believe in and don't listen to that shit. And I'm not saying I expect people to give me $1 million checks, but it's about the principle for me. It's like, I would rather, if you're worth that kind of money and you agree with me, but you're not willing to do it publicly, keep it to yourself. You know what I mean? Like, because some of us out here have risked everything to be ourselves. And that's what when people go like, what happened? I go, yeah, I lost everything that I had in the works, and the Food Network show had already been done. So it wasn't like I got fired from the Food Network because of that, but they did go in and erase all of my content, and they erased everything I was ever involved in at Food Network. I am ghosted. I am scrubbed from existence in their media space. So, it's like, yeah, it sucks to have that kind of erased. And all you were doing was being yourself, thinking out loud. I didn't condemn any group. I didn't say hateful things about any group. I didn't even say absurd things like what Nick Cannon just said about white people being inherently evil because they don't have enough vitamin D in their melanin or whatever. It was insane. It was like borderline eugenics shit. And all I said was, I said straight white male has become this century's N-word, meaning that people just sort of broad brush all of the world's problems on straight white men today, the way that the world put all of the problems society had on black people in the 50s and 60s leading up to the civil rights movement. And while I didn't articulate it like that, I did it in an extreme way, which is what I do as a comedian. That wasn't a sentiment that was like evil or targeted or hateful. It was literally observational of saying, this is the society we're getting to, and you guys call it progress, but it's not. We're literally just swinging the pendulum the other way, and we're going, now everything is white people's fault. And by the way, in the 2 years since I tweeted that, it has completely come to fruition. And to the point now where you're seeing videos of Antifa people and BLM people standing outside of white people's houses in Seattle and Portland and going, give us your house.
Oh, has that happened?
Oh, 100%. Look it up.
No,
it's a real video of like, did you know that black people used to live in this neighborhood? Give us your house. And it's like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, this is not progress. This is absurd. And this is absolutely... Like, people go, well, we want equality, not vengeance. No, some people want vengeance.
Yeah.
Some people just want restitution for the wrongs they've been felt. And listen, that's fine. I understand that feeling. I get it. Sometimes you want revenge, but just be honest and forthcoming about that, and then we can start to move past it. When you try to disguise your desire to hurt other people for self-retribution as I just want what's right, people start to believe it's what's right. And that's what's dangerous. And that's where we lose it as a society.
I've been thinking about wading into this whole battle, and I've taken some very copious notes, and I have a really good solo podcast planned on it. And then I kind of held back a little bit because what's the upside of this? Because, you want to say it the right way, but you're also creating ammunition for a bunch of psychopaths to take it out of context.
Yeah, but you know what? And you also, I think in this time, you have to make peace with people that aren't your customers taking you out of context. Like, if somebody that is never going to suspend their own leanings to hear something objectively is going to take me out of context, that's not somebody I can win over. At that point, I got to take the hardline approach of like, listen, if I'm in the business of steakhouses and you're a vegan, we just aren't for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I am Texas Roadhouse and you're coming in going, I hate meat and meat is violence against animals, I go, cool, I dig it. That's your thing, but you might want to leave because you're not going to like what you see here.
Right. Right. Which goes back to the whole problem with Twitter, right? Because you're pronouncing your meat recipes to a bunch of vegans and
Yeah.
shockingly they're upset.
Right, exactly. And they're just going, "Wait a minute, this is my space for me.
Right.
So why is your shit in my area of what I look at?" And so yeah, it's it's a weird, and we can't even begin to understand the algorithms that are at work behind what we're putting into this thing. So we can't even begin to understand how what we're putting into the blender, so to speak, is being jostled around and spit out in a way that allows us to be intentionally misinterpreted. I mean, don't think for a second that Twitter doesn't realize that polarization is the core of their business. And so the best way to get you using the platform is to show you shit you don't like. They're going to do that. And so the reason that there's probably an abundance is because they're sending my stuff to the feeds of people they know won't like it. So you could argue, is Twitter algorithmically actively steering you away from your core audience because that's what's good for their business? I don't know. But I think we're going to find out.
Josh, this is the sci-fi movie I want to see. I want to see a movie where someone invents a way to rebuild a person solely from their tweets. And so they take they take their tweets and they use them to program the entire personality of this person. And so you start to filter all of these people into society to replace the people who have died. And I think it would be chaos because only your worst qualities, your most inane or angry or emotional or malformed thoughts end up there. So if we were to construct you just from that, you would be a monster.
Yeah. And there's also no room for sarcasm in that. You know what I mean? So if you were to try to construct somebody's personality based off of their tweets and you can't put a code exception in there for when they're kidding, who knows? Like, and that's what's almost hilarious to me, minus the consequences of it, is like when I look at how people try to extrapolate identity from things I tweet things I quote.
That's pretty good.
Ironic. I'm going to use it. We're going to use it. The past tense of tweet. The things I quote.
Or a combination of wrote and tweeted,
and
right?
Quote. Yeah, things I quote in the past. Ironically and sarcastically, when they try to derive a real identity from those things, that's fucking horrifying. Because sometimes in my act and on Twitter, I'm taking the identity of somebody who believes the opposite of what I think for the joke to work. And so it's kind of like, but you don't get to hear me doing the voice or whatever that would come with it on Twitter. And so that's where you kind of open yourself. Like everyone just reads things in your voice. And so, well, I shouldn't say everyone. Dumb people, which is a lot of what's on Twitter, read everything in your voice and just think it's like you're just like you're just sort of like NPRing everything that's in your feed like it's your real sentiment. And you got on today and said, "Yo, you're at a jovial. Is that just you?" Yeah, I'm generally this energy. And my friend Charles was always like, "Yeah, part of your problem with Twitter is none of who you are is carried across in what you write. So like people can read that in whatever tone they assign to it, and you have no control over that message." So that is part of the volatility of Twitter, is that you can't control people hearing your voice and hearing like, "I'm fucking around about this." They just hear it the way that they hear it in their own head, which is almost funnier to me because now you actually know what their narrative is by how they interpret what you're saying. And so much of what I do comedically and creatively is using your own, sort of subverting your own inner monologue against you. I have a joke where I talk about like, "Man, I'm lazy. I would love to have slaves." And when the audience tightens up, I point out to them, I didn't say what color they'd be. You just assumed, which means you're racist. And so, it's one of my oldest bits, but it's like there's such an art to that of saying the only reason this is offensive is because of your internal bias to the thought. And so and then I take it into a fun place that kind of disarms how the guilt that people feel in the audience and also plays with the stereotypes about their assumptions. And so there's a lot of art to that. But, platforms like Twitter don't necessarily capture that process. That is why live entertainment is so important because, it's just like listening to an album and being at a concert. They're not the same experience. Being in the room, feeling the energy, hearing it played, sharing that energy with other people is a whole different experience than putting your headphones on and listening to a record in your room.
You need a puppet. You need a puppet that says all the things that you would normally say, where the voice can't be discerned from your own, and that way you can.
They have that guy. His name is Jeff Dunham,
right?
And
that's true.
And he's done a pretty good job of avoiding any credit. It's kind of funny because I could roll my eyes at you saying that, but Jeff Dunham's done it, and he's actually never been canceled. You might be on to, like, Jeff Dunham might be smarter than all of us.
I'm telling you,
hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's never had to own anything that he's said through the puppets.
And same thing with the South Park guys. They get to hide behind little cartoons. I'm telling you, it's not the craziest thing in the world. Think about it. Twote the puppet. I don't know why this came into my head. It has no context. I'll say it. Murder she twote. I'm just throwing it your way. You do whatever you want with it.
But what's funny, Steve, is like that an idea like that is gonna would end up being like a 10-episode Netflix series. Like, and it's just okay. So it's a reboot of Murder, She Wrote in current times where she's using social media to solve cases. Done.
Yeah.
What you just did, by the way, what every fucking 22-year-old development executive in Hollywood does all day and get paid millions of dollars to do.
I am way underpaid then.
I know, man. It's like, doesn't that, when I tell you that, doesn't that make you sick? Like, so how do I get that job? And it's like, well, who's your dad? Is your dad a Spielberg or something?
The stuff I throw away just casually, or that just ends up as a note that I'll never get to, is better than like 80% of the stuff I see like on TV or wherever. I don't know.
I did these other guys' podcast a couple weeks ago, or last week. I'm sorry, a couple days ago. And we were joking at the end of it about body swap movies. And because we were talking about the fact, like, I grew up in South Philly. I grew up around inner city culture. I grew up around like real black culture. I had, after my mom's divorce from my dad, one of the guys she dated for many years was a black dude from the South. So I spent a lot of time around his family, had a lot of real cultural exposure. And so we were joking about the fact of like me doing an interracial body swap movie where my wife is black and then we end up body swapping into each other's bodies. And so like, she's like a black chick who has to like work in corporate America. And I'm this white guy who has to like figure out how to navigate her cultural space. And we're this whole time, we're like mocking body swap movies and we're joking. And I go like, what would we call it? And one of the other guys on that podcast was like, we'll call it Freaky Friday After Next. And like a hilarious mashup. And then as we're done, I go, you do know that like this idea has either already been developed in Hollywood, or you could probably take this into a room tomorrow if you could get the meeting and you'd sell it in the fucking room, because it is similar enough to something that has been done before. It is culturally relevant in today's space. And I was like, all you'd have to do is get the right person attached to it and you would sell this movie. I go, by the way, guys, this is what movie pitches are. This nonsense that we think we're joking around and we're having fun with, this is what real people who do this get paid to do every day.
Well, especially if you could attach a name to it.
Yeah, well, I was like, dude, I could probably, if I wrote this script, I could probably hand it to Tiffany Haddish, and she would probably take it over to her agency and go to the place that I have an overall deal. We're going to make this movie. And they would just make it. I mean, it's really, and people go like, how do you make it in Hollywood? It's really as fucking dumb as that. It's like, if you have the right idea for the right person and you happen to know that person, that's it. That's all it takes. And then when they say it's like, it's who you know, it's not like you have to know Spielberg. It could just be as simple as knowing the person who's right for the thing you made and just happening to give it to them and them being able to go get it made. That's it.
I wish I knew that before I wrote
It's
a
gross.
screenplay. I wrote a screenplay like, I don't know, 15 years ago. And, I just didn't know how Hollywood works. I thought you needed a screenplay. You don't need a screenplay. They write the screenplay
Right.
after the idea is sold with a
After you sell
star.
the
Yeah.
idea, yeah. I mean, there are guys that are like my age, and all they are is pitchmen. They literally just go in the room, pitch ideas, and they walk away with a $50,000 check every time, and they live off that. They sell one or two ideas a year, and that's their livelihood, and then they do whatever the fuck they want for the
That's a
rest of the
gig.
year. It's a pretty good gig, but you got to be able to get those meetings all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you can't really get the meetings until you sell something, and you need the meetings to sell something. So it is very kind of chicken and egg. And you could have a great idea, by the way, that nobody buys, and then somebody else makes 10 years later, and you go, what the fuck? I pitched that idea 10 years ago and they didn't make it, and now it's the number one show. So that's what
Man.
lawyers are for.
Yeah, Hollywood, it's not a business. It is a business, but for most people in it, it's just a dream, and it's not very. I think there's an expectation that you should make money from it, but most don't. I looked at
Yeah.
the numbers.
Yeah, it's very, very tough. And like my thing at this point is like, if I can have these other irons in the fire and make enough money to produce my own shit the way I want to and not answer to anybody, I'd rather do that. And if it's a slow burn where I'm like a guy like Carlin, where my comedy career doesn't become self-sustaining until I'm in my late 40s, early 50s, that's fine too. That would be a great retirement. Be done working and go do stand up and make millions of dollars in your 50s and be dead by 70. I'm fine with that life.
Ah, man. Well, listen, I wish you luck, and hopefully you last past your 70s.
Yeah,
And
we'll see.
we'll
I'm
do this.
halfway there. I am halfway there.